Hello and welcome to the Garden Organic Podcast. I'm Sarah Brown and I'm joined by Chris Collins. Each month we like to bring you some tips for your organic growing, whether like me you have a garden or like Chris you live in a city and you grow on an allotment or a balcony. We're often joined by an interesting guest whose life is shaped by gardening and particularly organic growing. So this month we have Jane Perrone, a houseplant expert and one of the country's best known gardening journalists. When we met her, we asked her how to grow houseplants the organic way. But before that, Chris and I thought we might share with you some ideas on how to keep your Christmas green and sustainable. We also dipped into some of this year's best gardening books, which you might like to give or receive as presents. So wherever you're listening, on the run, in a car, or down in the potting shed, I hope you enjoy our Organic Gardening Podcast. Okay, Chris, I've got some good news. Our lovely podcast, which I still feel is a baby, we've only been doing it for a few months, we've been shortlisted for an award.
That is brilliant. Who is this with?
This is the Garden Media Guild.
Wow, we're quite high up then amongst the great and the good.
Well, I like to think so, but isn't that amazing?
It's incredible.
So this is a short list of just, I think, 4 or 5 for Podcast of the Year.
Do you know how hard, because I'm a member of the Garden Media Guild, do you know how hard it is to get on that list?
No, I don't.
That is really, you're right. I mean, they're quite big journalists, strict journalists that do the judging on it, you know, they really are. So actually, in the little time we've been doing this, that is an amazing piece of news.
Well, I think thanks to our listeners, to be honest, because we get such lovely feedback from them, and it gives me heart each month to do it.
I think it's important to say a little bit that also down to you, Sarah, because I know all the footwork you do behind the scenes and how you put it all together. So I'm really chuffed for you, actually. I really am.
Thank you, Chris. That's very generous, but we're a team. So, Chris, now is the moment. With Christmas coming, it's December. Kick off the Wellingtons, have a seat, tell me how you're going to do Christmas.
Well, I think it is, whenever we like it, it's a bit of time for indulgence, isn't it? You know, you're always going to think that sort of time to spend with family, friends, have a few beers maybe out in the town in London for me, and just get together with people and obviously always eat heartily. I think it's that kind of thing. I think you have to be a bit careful with it because it can be incredibly wasteful time, can't it, Sarah? I was in a well-known £1 shop recently, and it's aisles and aisles of plastic of Christmas decorations, and they don't represent Christmas to me. I don't feel homely. It kind of feels like you're just going through the motions a bit with it.
Absolutely. We're very keen that it should be as green as possible. Yeah. Actually, literally green, because I think rather than rush out and buy a whole load of bright plastic tack from the shops, why not decorate using some green materials? Maybe some cuttings from your garden. I've got a lot of ivy, for instance.
Or a holly, if you have a holly on that, yeah.
So these are lovely cuttings that you can use to decorate round your mantelpiece or bookshelves or whatever.
That kind of earthy, natural materials is really, I think, that really sums up Christmas, doesn't it? It's a celebration of your year, isn't it, I think?
And you're doing it yourself. You're part of the process of the celebration as opposed to just buying it all.
Do you remember when you were young and you used to make the paper chains? And
yes.
It would take you hours, but it was a real part of Christmas, wasn't it? You didn't just go down, buy something for £1, whack it up. It was a real process, a family sort of occasion, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
So if you do that with your holly and your ivy and make something natural, keep it earthy.
Nice music on.
Yes.
Have a glass.
Bit of Val Doonican, maybe a glass of port.
If you have to, it's Vivaldi for me, but there you go.
Yeah.
What present would you like for Christmas?
Well, I was thinking about this, Sarah, and obviously it's going to be a horticultural present. What else could it be? And if I was buying something for someone, in fact, even my good lady, I think the best present to buy would be a propagator, an electric propagator.
Ooh, nice.
Just because I think that is the start of the gardening journey. If you can raise a seed into a plant, I've got you. You're going to be a gardener. And I just think that to me, it encompasses, the propagator encompasses everything a gardener is, and that is about raising and looking after plants.
No, I've never had one, but I assume the benefit of it is that it gets you going early as well.
Extended season, quicker germination. So like people, you see results quicker.
And a regular, constant heat.
Yes, so I always call it hot bottoms, cool tops, because I like to mist it down as well. And you just get really strong, healthy start to the season with your seedlings. Extended season, but healthy, tough, strong plants. Yeah. And just that whole journey of taking that, the miracle of seed, that tiny little thing.
Yes.
Now that little sort of capsule that's just caught in time, and then you germinate it and it comes to life. that's the magic of gardening, surely.
Yeah. And for me, I have to admit, it would be gloves. Now, I know you don't
I've
wear
never worn them.
gloves.
Yeah,
I know.
that's all right. That's okay. We can see my hands are calloused up quite heavily. It's funny, isn't it? How you garden a certain way and you kind of get used to doing it.
Well, I realise one of them is that I have quite a lot of gravel paths in my garden around my beds, and of course those are fantastic seed beds. Forget the propagator, just come to my gravel paths. And anyone who has gravel paths probably spends a lot of their time on their knees pulling weeds out.
Yeah, sure.
So that's what I use gloves for, and I find some gloves are too thin. They wear out.
They fall
almost
apart
straight
quite
away.
easy,
Exactly.
don't they? Yeah.
So then you go for a thicker glove, and then it's too
Can't feel
cumbersome.
anything.
Exactly. So you've got to find exactly the right glove. Now, I think I found them in the Organic Gardening Catalogue.
Brilliant.
So I'm going to do a little plug for the Organic Gardening Catalogue, partly because if you're a Garden Organic member, you'll get 10% off, but mainly because obviously all their products are aligned with the Organic Gardening
And
principles.
also, they're of quality, I have to say. I love that catalogue, and all my gardening, my things I need, my seaweed extract, my comfrey pellets, all come from that catalogue, and I will literally set myself up in the new year with all the stuff I need for the season ahead. It's everything you need is in there as an organic gardener.
So go to the organicgardeningcatalog.com. Very simple to find on the website.
It is, and I really, really can't stress how much I recommend that. I really do.
Great. Now, the question we get asked so often is, should it be a real tree or should it be an artificial one?
What's your choice then, Sarah?
Well, I'm lucky because I live in the country, and because near me, very close to me in fact, there's a farmer who sets aside one small part of his farm. He sets aside a field where he grows Christmas trees. And it's part of our Christmas tradition is that we go there, we have a nice glass with him, he either cuts it for us or he digs it out for us. And I feel that is very green and very nice.
It's sustainable.
It's very sustainable because it's not his whole farm. He hasn't imported a tree from Norway or whatever. It's got a very low carbon footprint. I used to get them dug out and planted. Now I have no longer space in my garden to plant a Christmas tree. So instead he saws it. But what I think I would stress is, if you're going to buy a real tree, think about what you're going to do after Christmas.
I think in where I'm in London, the abandoned Christmas tree is a really sore sight in January, and there's no need for it because local parks will do pickups where you can take them, put them in a big pile, and they'll go off to be shredded, which is what you're just about to talk about.
I think that probably happens all around the country now, I hope. I actually use mine to lop the branches off, and I lay them down on my muddy paths. Now, for me, going down to feed the hens in the morning, it's incredibly slippery and muddy.
Yeah.
If I put those branches down, then I
So
don't
serve a
see.
purpose. I think it's important you mentioned about the farmer because we're not anti-business. People need to make a living, don't they? And I think that's important we feed into our local economies, that we support each other like that. So we're not anti-business and we're not anti-real tree, but maybe just think about where you're getting it from.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I must admit I am an artificial tree man. I've got they're very lifelike nowadays. And there's one reason for that is I use it over and over and over again. And it goes in a box and it goes in the cupboard and I take it out a couple of weeks before Christmas and I put it up. And then we try and put as much natural stuff on it as we can. I actually do that more than anything because it doesn't make a mess in the flat and we're quite busy people and we're out all day. Yeah. So it's a practical thing for me really, as well as maybe there is a little bit of sustainability because I'm using the same thing over and over again.
I think it's part of the mantra about reduce, reuse, recycle.
Perfect.
And that's exactly what we're both doing, whether it's real or artificial.
Yep.
Think about reusing it and think about how you're going to recycle it when you've stopped using it.
Couldn't agree more, Sarah.
Great. Wrapping paper, of course, is another thing. That's fantastic on your compost heap. It provides that nice brown balance.
50-50 green and live materials but dead
You
materials.
put it so well, I was getting there. But of course, if you buy that nasty plasticky foil type paper, that's not going to compost. No. So if you can avoid that, you can get recycled wrapping paper as well.
You can, I think you're right. I think, again, you're up against this trouble with the fact that you can get it that horrible stuff so cheap, and people need to think about that a little bit more. Obviously, as a man, I love wrapping. I can't get enough of it. I'll do it all year if I had my way.
Oh, yeah, I believe that. Last minute, practically midnight.
You'll not ever see badder wrapped presents than the ones that I do. And really, honestly, it's atrocious.
I rather like the Japanese style of wrapping, and this will mean something to you because I know your wife's Japanese, where it's wrapped in a beautiful piece of material.
You know what, Sarah? Even when I worked in Mitsukoshi in Japan, when somebody bought a plant, the packaging, the love and attention the Japanese put into it, you'd be afraid to open it. It looks so beautiful. Yes. They really they go that extra bit.
Yes.
And it's about making the other person feel special. And I think, well, what else is Christmas for?
Yes.
It's about loved ones. That's what it's for. I'm just ashamed I'm so rubbish at it.
It's love and warmth, Chris.
Yep.
You have a lot of that.
It's a
so
thought
that's
that
nice.
counts. We love to say that. Well, Sarah, I know you're a great reader.
I am.
I know you are. I love a book. And there's lots of fascinating gardening books out there, aren't there, which would make brilliant stocking fillers.
Oh, there's just a huge variety, and they're all so tempting. You know, it's difficult.
You can spend a lot of pocket money if you weren't careful.
Oh, you could not go out in the garden at all. You could
Yeah.
just sit and read about it. But I've highlighted a few, and I know that you agree with me. We've just got half a dozen that we really think our listeners would relish, either for themselves or maybe feeling generous they could treat somebody else.
Sure.
But I'm going to kick off with The Garden Jungle by Dave Goulson. Now, Dave is Professor of Biological Sciences at the University of Sussex. He's an academic, but don't be put off by that. Like all the best academics, he's a brilliant communicator. His writing style is friendly, it's accessible, it's amusing, you'll laugh out loud in some places. But the point about this book is he talks about all the wildlife you're going to find in your garden or that you share your garden space with, if obviously you grow organically. So he describes moths, frogs, ants, worms, whatever it is you're going to encounter and how you can encourage them into your garden. So you learn the most amazing facts. Did you know a female ant can live up to 30 years?
30 years?
30 years!
Really?
And did you know there's a little tiny glutinous snail that is only found in one pond in Wales?
Wow.
Goulson, he is the specialist on bees,
Right.
all the different species, how they function, where they like to live. Also how to bring them into your garden. That's the important thing. That's what I love about it.
So he's connecting that wider picture, the picture of nature, and bringing them into your space, your garden space. That's the idea.
Absolutely. And then making you be more mindful while you're in the garden. Completely fell in love with earwigs when I read this book. I've never really given earwigs much of a
Because
thought.
additionally you would have gone, oh, I've got earwigs in my dahlias, and it would have been a nightmare. But actually, it's not so big a thing, is it, really?
No, it's not. And he actually encourages them around his trees, his fruit trees, because they will get rid of the pests, the aphids and whatever. So, yes, fall in love with an earwig and buy this book.
That's a great expression.
Dave Goulson, The Garden Jungle. And you had one also on wildlife.
Well, obviously, my one, I'm going to go for Kate Bradbury, again on the wildlife gardening front.
who you met last
I
month.
did. She's a really inspirational lady, you know. I really liked her. She's full of energy, you know. But I wouldn't let that put me off saying what I think about her book. But the book, I promise you, that aside, is now become really my wildlife gardening Bible in terms of practical gardening and actually doing stuff in the garden. It's very concise, it's full of practical tips. Little things like bee hotels, the sort of thing you buy, put on the wall and forget about. And she tells you about how you need to clean them, because you obviously stop getting fungus going there, put them in the dry through the winter so it protects any chrysalis in there. All those sort of little tips that you don't quite, you know, because they're trendy and they're fashionable and you see them in garden centres, there's a bit more to it than that. And what's really interesting is she gives you three stages. You don't have to be a real expert. She gives you 3 easy stages. You can do it this way, or you can go a bit deeper, or you can go a bit deeper. So I find it, to me, it encompasses that, it's a bit like Dave Goulson, it encompasses that idea that our changing attitude to gardening, that we're suddenly looking at it through broader eyes, you know, we're looking at it much wider. Before, when I started with gardens on the parks, you didn't really think about this stuff. Everything had to be neat, tidy, it was very beautiful, but you weren't really thinking about the bee or the earwig, so it just kind of, to me, captures the fact that where we're heading as an industry, as a profession, as a passion, and I think Kate really gets it well. And I also like the fact that she's liaised with the RHS and Wildflower Trust on it. She hasn't gone out there and said, I know it all. She's actually really done a lot of research with other organisations, and it makes it a very solid book. And she talks about balconies. What else can I ask for?
That's perfect. Both authors make the point that you are sharing your space with the wildlife.
Yeah.
You may call it your garden, your balcony or whatever, but the fundamental principle is that you are sharing it with all the other creatures that are part of it.
And if you've not got those things in your garden, imagine a garden without birds in it.
Yeah.
It's not a garden, sorry.
Well, I have to say, Goulson is excellent on all the pesticide use as well.
Yeah.
So, moving on from wildlife, the next book that I thought would be interesting that you may want to have a look at is Wild About Weeds. Now, this is a book written by Jack Wallington, and he calls it Garden Design with Rebel Plants.
I love the expression rebel plant.
I love the fact that he defined, well, we know the definition of a weed is a plant in a wrong place, but I think he also goes a little bit further and he says a weed without humans is actually just a plant. Whereas a plant that causes problems for humans is now called a weed.
Yes, yeah, it's
and so
interesting.
it's all in, it sounds a bit semantics. But what I quite like is that he divides the weeds into good, the bad and the unappreciated. And I like that. He identifies weeds that will work as part of your garden design for all sorts of different areas. So he talks about weeds that will bring colour into your garden, weeds for containers, for shady areas, for walls, for ground cover. In other words, he deals with the weeds as if they are plants.
But that's what you want. That's what you want from a gardening book like this. You want those tips, those little heads ups,
Yes.
you know, those kind of things. Like, oh, that's a good idea. And I think he's been quite successful at that.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
My only beef about this book is you really do have to brush up on your Latin names.
So it's a gardener's gardening book then,
It's
really?
a gardener's gardening book,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's very much a garden design book. It will make you look at weeds with new eyes, though,
Yes.
and that I really,
Well,
really like.
it's-
And it's a beautiful book to look at as
It's
well.
very, isn't it? It's stunning to look. Visually, it's
Yeah.
stunning. Eh?
And talking of practical tips, let's move on to the next book, which is Kim Stoddart's Climate Change Gardening. Now, I know you're a huge fan of this one, and also you met Kim.
I did. We interviewed her for a podcast. Very bubbly character, very passionate about what she does again. I think this book is it's challenging is a good word. It's a difficult subject in
Yeah.
many ways. Yeah.
Climate change is also climate chaos. It's also changing
Yes.
weather patterns, and she writes about how to deal with those.
It's just about taking your space and what's happening in your space and acting accordingly. There's great bits in it, a bit like if you have a waterlogged garden, about planting natural hedgerows, there's natural soakaways to absorb the extra water. Things like alders will naturally take up a lot of water. So it's very, very practical. I really like it. It's just easy to look through, and there's kind of boxes with tips and tricks in it. And I think they've done a good job. What is a difficult subject, I think they've done a really good job of.
I agree.
So I see, Sarah, we've got 2 cookery-related books, haven't we?
Well, they're definitely food related, and I think we have to remember that's important.
Yes.
Partly because it's Christmas, but also I think because I'm a great veg grower, I like people who love their veg and their varieties, but also people who love cooking and eating them.
Sure, the whole process is so important, seed to plate, isn't it?
Exactly. So the first one is by Raymond Blanc, the famous chef.
I know him well. I did a garden with him at Hampton Court and his son a couple of years ago.
did
So he's
you?
a very amiable man, I have to say.
He's
That's
a
on-
great character,
Yeah.
and he's written this book called The Lost Orchard, and he writes passionately about his orchard at Le Manoir. You know his
he's a
beautiful
big
house in Oxfordshire.
He's a big heritage supporter of heritage
Huge.
varieties.
He's
yeah.
researched thousands, literally thousands of varieties of fruit. Apples, pears, peaches, figs, quince, whatever. He wanted to plant these heritage varieties to keep them going. But of course, Blanc is also a chef. So the beauty of this book is we not only have a potted history of each of the varieties that he's planted, but also an analysis of how each of those fruits taste and also how they cook. So for instance, you have the acidity of a Cox apple is perfect for a tarte tatin.
Right.
I found it a fascinating book. He's very French and it comes across. And to be honest, I think most of it was dictated. Because as you read it, you get the sense of
Of him
enormous-
talking, of him speaking,
at
yeah.
speed.
Yes,
There's no doubt
yeah,
about it.
yeah.
But Chris, I say if you buy this book, you'll be inspired not only to plant your own heritage trees, but you'll probably make the perfect tart because he's
Yeah.
got recipes in the back of it. And you'll certainly never buy a supermarket apple again.
Right, that's good news. That's good news. I'm
Yeah.
going to have to get myself a copy of that, definitely.
Yeah, I would. It's a beautiful book. It's
Yeah.
worth buying. And then the other one, which is related to eating, is the well-known chef and grower Mark Diacono.
Him of River Cottage, originally fame.
Exactly. And he's brought out a book called Sour.
I think this is a great book, and I think it's a subject matter, right, that most people wouldn't go near. We are inundated with the cake and baking and all this sort of sugar, and so to take on a subject like this is really good, and it's full of brilliant recipes. I even, just starting with the cover, the really luminous cover, I really love that. And I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but that attracted me to it straight away. And the recipes, I mean, you've got, Grandad's trifle, a mojito marmalade. I mean, come on, what's not to like about it?
I have a naturally sour palate anyway, so I was thrilled when you introduced this to me.
There's some amazing things. He talks about kimchi, like pickled cabbage with lots of garlic, and it's quite sour and bitter. But they eat 300 tons of it in Korea, so they used to let things go sour for taste over the centuries.
But it's also the fermentation process.
That's
isn't
right,
it?
yeah,
It helps
yeah.
preserve it, but brings out those bacteria which we know are good for our
And then
health.
change the flavour, exactly. And we've been doing it. This is not new. We've done it for centuries, but I'm so glad Mark's highlighted it, and I really recommend it. There's some brilliant recipes in it.
I think the theme that we have here is these are interesting books. They're practical. They're written by people at the top of their game. They know exactly what they're saying. But more importantly, they're very accessible.
Yes.
They're really nice to sit
they're
down
all-
in an armchair and read and enjoy.
And they're very practical. I think you want to go out and play these subject matters out, basically. It does make you want to garden, it does make you want to cook, and I think that's job done, I reckon. I really recommend all 6 of them, I really do.
So if you didn't catch all the names and the authors of these books, then we'll put them all up on the Garden Organic website. And now our guest this month is Jane Perrone. Jane is the country's leading expert on houseplants and one of the country's best-known gardening journalists, having worked on The Guardian for over 20 years. Her podcast, On the Ledge, has a huge and constantly growing following. Chris and I visited Jane in her home and chatted to her amongst all the greenery. I went along as well because I'm not an experienced houseplant grower and I wanted to ask Jane some beginner's questions on what plants to choose and how to succeed. And just before we start, I think we should share our sympathy with Chris, who is clearly struggling with a cold and a runny nose. Why I didn't pass him a handkerchief, I don't know.
Hi Jane, lovely to see you.
Nice to have you in my home.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, it's a bit of a privilege. We're talking to houseplants because I'm a big houseplant man in it. And the reason I am is because for the first sort of 8 years of my life after I left home, I didn't have a garden. So houseplants were my garden. I have to confess I blew up 3 tellies in my bedsit watering them because I had so many at one point. It was literally a jungle. But I'm very close to them. Do you think that houseplants are popular now? Because obviously we have a bit more of a transitional population, a lot of renters. Do you think that helps?
I think that is a big factor in why houseplants are popular. I was looking at my blog and I wrote a post in about 2010 saying it's so annoying, houseplants are not very popular, and I go into garden centres and there aren't any. And then in the last few years this amazing explosion of interest has happened, which has been delightful to see. And I think it's partly due to that renting population who are looking for something to nurture. And I think it's also down to things like micropropagation and things where we're now able to get plants like Phalaenopsis orchids and Nepenthes pitcher plants.
Cost-wise.
The price of those exotic plants has come down. For good or ill, supermarkets have entered the market for these kind of plants. So people are doing their shopping and seeing plants and picking them up. I think also the internet, and particularly Instagram, has played a really big role.
You think social media has a big role in this?
Social media definitely, because people are able to educate themselves. They see something on social media and think, oh my gosh, what is that plant? Then they see, oh, it's Calathea orbifolia. They go and Google it and they find this wealth of information. And I need to buy every type of Calathea there is. And so I think that the internet has really helped. And so as a result, there's been this explosion of interest, which is great. Please.
So how do you equate then when you would grow houseplants? How do you be organic? I know organic's very important to you. So how do you bring that into play with your houseplant collections?
That's a really good question. So I joined Garden Organic, early 2000s, I would say. So I've been a member for a really long time. I used to love going up to your HQ near Coventry and spending time there. So I'm an enthusiastic organic gardener. When it comes to houseplants, I think organic is... Well, in a way, it's a bit more tricky, but in a way, it's simpler in that you don't have a lot of the factors you do with outside. Like, you're not worrying about, pest control. In a way, pest control is really quite simple in that most things indoors, it's just a case of wiping it off with a damp cloth. Unless you've got a massive collection of 1,000 plants, really, you should be able to handle most pest infections very simply with some insecticidal soap. It's not that complicated a thing. And you're also controlling all the elements. And you can get, in fact, somebody emailed me this morning asking about organic fertiliser. And there are organic houseplant fertilisers out there. So in a way, it's kind of simpler. I think one of the biggest challenges is peat-free, which it's really, really tricky. Where I live, it's really super tricky to get hold of good peat-free compost, and so that's a really live issue, and one that I'm very concerned about, because we're supposed to be peat free by next year. That's not going to happen in the UK, is it? So that's something that's kind of on my mind. And also things like reducing plastic as well. Should we all be planting in terracotta pots? Well, yes, probably we should. Can we cut down on plastic in the garden and in the house?
Or in our packaging as well. Houseplants tend to come heavily packaged.
In plastic sleeves and all sorts. So there are lots of challenges. I think, the other issue with houseplants is oftentimes when you're buying them from the big Dutch nurseries, they're coming preloaded with insecticides, systemic insecticides in them. How can you get around that? Well, it's tricky because there aren't that many growers who are not doing that, who are growing on a big scale. But then I always try to educate people about propagation, in that if you start getting into propagation, you can then create plants which you can share with friends and family. And the beauty of that is you are producing a plant which from the very beginning is adapted to your home, as opposed to coming from a nursery where it's computer controlled, everything's perfect, and people can't say, oh, I can't believe it, I brought this plant home and a month later it's looking really miserable. It's in shock.
It's what you get
a terrible shock.
The big one is basil, isn't it? You buy a basil from the supermarket, it looks amazing, but it's come from a Buckingham Palace into... But propagation's an interesting one because houseplants are very easy to propagate.
Yes, and one of the things I'm doing on my podcast at the minute, I did it last year as well, is something called the Sow Along, which is sowing houseplants from seed, which is really fun, and it really helps people to get an insight into how these things grow, to actually grow them from seed. So I encourage people to try that from cacti, coleus, lots of different succulents. It's really,
because most people wouldn't think to grow houseplants from seed, would they?
It's really fun. It's really, really fun. And also I encourage people to do cuttings as well. Because as well, it's ridiculously easy most of the time. It's so much fun. I think I find kind of frustrating when people talk about organic gardening, and I guess this is something probably that Garden Organic would recognise, is people will say, oh, I don't use any chemicals. And I always find that really frustrating, because actually, of course you do, because chemicals are just things that we're all made of. Everything's made of chemicals, and it's that, sometimes the lack of...
Do you think we're distracted?
Nuance.
We're distracted by the whole chemicals thing, and actually it's a
broader
broader subject.
Nuance. And actually you can say, of course, yes, I'm not using any synthetic chemicals, which is a more accurate way of describing it, but oftentimes people are black and white about it.
So that's reflected in your podcast?
Yeah, so I started my podcast 2 years ago because I was doing a podcast on gardening for The Guardian with Alice Fowler, which I loved doing. It was so much fun. And when that ended, I just thought, I really miss podcasting. And I thought houseplants would be a good topic because I do have a genuine interest in them. But also it was kind of strategic in that I knew houseplants were on the up, and this was an area that really wasn't catered for. Like garden media across the board were not really talking about houseplants. There were some books, but there wasn't a lot else for people to look at. And so I thought that podcasts should be a good area to tackle. And my audience is just amazing. Stuff that they're doing, the experimental kind of way they're displaying houseplants is really awe-inspiring.
So you're getting all that feedback. It's interesting you say that, how it begins at an early age, because I remember I just rooted a bit of plectranthus in a bit of water, and that was the start really of my gardening career. So I think hopefully while you're getting people to grow houseplants, it then branches out. They have wider ambitions.
Definitely. I definitely think that's right, because those people, as soon as they get any more space, like a balcony or a tiny patio or a front step or something, they're going to see what they can grow outside as well. So it does lead on, and they're gaining knowledge all the time. I'm really impressed by the depth of knowledge that people have. So for example, there's this whole debate about monsteras thing about a year and a half ago, where lots of plant shops were selling this thing that they were describing as Monstera obliqua. And so this is a relatively Swiss cheese plant, but it's got much smaller leaves. And people were being sold this as Monstera obliqua. And then suddenly at some point, somebody spoke to an aroid expert who said, there ain't no way that's Monstera obliqua, because there's only about this many plants of that in the whole of Western Europe, and it's not obliqua, it's most likely Adansonii. And now this is getting quite technical now, right? This is getting quite technical. This is not just, have I overwatered my houseplant? This is aroid identification at a quite intense level. And yet people on Instagram were, getting all het up about it, reading scientific papers. I mean, going in really deep on it, which is amazing. I just love the fact that people are doing that.
It causes that train reaction, doesn't it?
And you can mine deep to find out the information you need. It can lead you on kind of a wormhole where you end up spent all morning trying to figure out what monster you've got.
It can distract you, is what you're saying. Yeah,
exactly.
Brilliant. Well, I know Sarah's here with us, and Sarah I think she'd mind me calling her a bit of a houseplant novice.
Absolutely. Chris,
is that all right?
Yes, I'm happy out in my
I know
veg
she's a very, very, very good gardener, so I just wanted to maybe hand over to Sarah, because she might have some just basic questions for you.
Yeah. Thank you. And so you're quite right, I am a novice. As a beginner, can you give me maybe 2 or 3 examples of houseplants that will look good all through the year? We all know about the office spider plant, but I want something a little nicer and also requires a bit of gardening skill, because our listeners are gardeners. So something that's perhaps different and interesting, but makes a nice arrangement through the year.
Well, I think the first thing to say is, the first thing you need to do when you're thinking about a houseplant for your home is look at your conditions. So cacti and succulents, you can buy them everywhere now. And really, if you're going to talk about a plant that's going to stay beautiful all year round and not cause you a lot of trouble, cacti and succulents can be that answer. but only if you've got enough light to offer them. So if you've got, like, this is a south-facing window. Cacti succulents do really well here because it's south-facing. I've also got a grow light over there, which is supplementing the light over there, so you can use grow lights if you don't have a lot of light, but you want
that's
to have
a light you can buy.
Yeah, so it's
similar to sunshine?
Yeah, exactly. And mostly these days they're LED, so they're cheap to run, and they provide the light spectrum that plants need. So that you can buy various configurations of those to up your light if you want to have cacti succulents. But if you're talking about like plants that I love and that I think are really, really easy, I don't think you can go too far wrong with members of the Peperomia family. I love peperomias. Would you like peperomias?
I love peperomia. Yeah,
well, I've got a couple in here.
Describe them to me because I haven't heard of
Okay,
it.
so I'll just go and get one. So this, I can't remember which one this is now. Is this Angulata? I'm going to have to look at my list, but this one's been very mistreated over the winter. It's been up in my bathroom, but it's still actually looking all right.
It's looking great.
It's been up in my bathroom all winter.
So to people listening in, this is, and again from a novice, this is a very pretty trailing plant with heart-shaped leaves. Dark green. And
peperomias, there's absolutely loads of peperomia
lots.
species. They don't all look like this, but they're fleshy-leaved green foliage plants, basically.
You see them, I've seen them growing wild in Africa, and they can grow epiphytically. You'll see them growing in moss banks, and they're all quite, they can take quite dark, actually, areas as well. Very tough. Very, very tough plant, and coming of real variety, as Jane says.
Is it fair to say that most indoor plants you grow for the foliage rather than the flowers?
Well, my view on that is that yes, that is true mostly, but I am a big fan of flowering houseplants. Phalaenopsis is the obvious one. The moth orchid is the obvious one that people always recommend, but I have and I don't actually have any in here, but we can look at the back later, of my gesneriads. So gesneriads are made up of plants like Streptocarpus, African violet, Petrocosmia, Coleria, and I love these. They're one of my favourite plant families. They are just adorable, and they flower. So when they're all flowering, they look
incredible.
They're absolutely amazing flowers. So Streptocarpus are good plants if they've got green fleshy leaves, so you don't need to give them a huge amount of water, but you do have the bonus of these lovely flowers.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you there because I know the question you always get asked.
Yes.
And Chris, you may like to chip in on this one. Watering.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is the problem that most people are nervous about when they're growing.
The terrifying subject of watering. The old story is the number one cause of houseplants dying is overwatering.
Yeah.
And that is kind of true because people think, oh, my plant's wilting, but I need to water it. Whereas wilting can be a symptom of underwatering or overwatering. So that's how plants generally will die. Yeah. And I always say to people, just observe your plant. So if you've got one house plant and you're worried about it, put it somewhere where you are going to watch it.
To notice it's there.
Notice what's going on. And, don't be afraid to stick your finger in the soil and see what's happening around the root level as opposed to the surface of the soil so that you only water when it really needs it. But that said, there are houseplants which prefer to be soaked all the time. So if you're an overwaterer, you need to pick one of those.
Papyrus is a good one. You can get the papyrus and water away. I think you're right. I think when most people kill houseplants is in the winter. They kill them through kindness, basically, because and I think you've also got that other concept. People don't notice the plant for 3 weeks, suddenly notice it, water it to death, and then forget about it for 3 weeks. Treat it like a pet. I would. That's quite a good analogy.
Yeah.
Make sure you give it at least 2 minutes of your attention every day.
So what you're saying is, in the winter, don't water it so much.
Well, I'm very sparing in the winter. Yeah, I'm very sparing in the winter. I don't water hard. I mean, I've got big Ficus benjaminas in my front room and stuff, and I'm every 3 weeks maybe, and I'm very, very careful about it. The other big thing to mention is heat source. People put them near radiators and stuff, and you get this sudden temperature flux, and so you'll get browning on the edge of the leaf. That's a classic example of the plant's not transpiring properly, because you'll go out all day, it's 15 degrees, you come in, you put the heating on, it's 30 degrees, and that heat source can cause damage as well and interfere with the transpiration of the plant.
So that brings me, Chris, to conservatories, because you've got huge heat fluctuations there and great light variations. Is that a problem?
I don't think so. I'd love a conservatory, actually. I'd go mad in it.
Afterwards we can go out to
You got one out there,
I've got a glass roofed extension, which is good because it's actually north facing, so it's actually ideal in that there's lots of light. It doesn't
bleach them. Yeah.
But you have to be careful with how close to the light source your plants are, and it will vary from plant to plant. And you can look at your plant and get an idea about watering just from looking at it. So something like this peperomia or the cacti, you've got a fleshy leaf, and that's adapted to conserve water. Well, so that's not going to mind lower humidity levels. and it's not going to mind not getting water. Whereas something, I'm just going to get my Tenanthe, which is not looking that great. It's the end of winter. It's had spider mite. It's all a bit pear-shaped, but it's coming back. So this Tenanthe, it's got very papery leaves, and so that really is bothered by dry air. And especially when the heaters come on in the autumn, it suddenly goes, what the heck is happening? And starts to suffer. So you can know a lot from just looking at the makeup of your plant and what kind of plant it is, and then adapt accordingly as to how you treat it.
And you spray?
I was going to say, the good thing about the conservatories is you can mist them down, and that'll help. You've got to also remember most houseplants are forest floor, so they're used to, so they don't like really burning direct sunlight, which is the north facing really helps. If you put most houseplants in a window, south facing window, they will bleach because they don't like that intense sunshine. But it is a little bit of research, really, isn't it? If you want to look at the plants that succeed, a bit like your own garden, you put a few things, see what works, what doesn't, you play around with it.
You've got to just try things out. You've got to experiment and find out what works for you. So it may be that you try Phalaenopsis orchids and they just don't suit you.
Okay, one final question. I'm a great veg grower. Do you grow any edibles indoors? Are there edible houseplants?
Yes, I mean there's a few different things you can do. I quite often sow microgreens, which is a very quick and easy way of getting greens indoors. I mean, there are a couple of houseplants that are actually edible. So there's something called Oxalis triangularis, which is a very sort of trendy, popular houseplant. You're probably best not eating tons of the stuff because it does contain oxalic acid, but you'd have to eat pounds of it really. But it's interesting just to taste that tiny leaf. It's very lemony. It's a member of the sorrel family.
Sorrel, yes.
But you can also grow herbs inside. Again, it's all dependent on how much light you've got. And you can now buy lots of different kits for putting grow lights together with containers that open up options on that front.
Yeah, pea shoots is my big thing indoors because I just love them in a sandwich and in a salad, and you can just bang them on the windowsill, can't you? And you're
that's
away.
just as simple as sowing peas in a tray.
It's like, in a tray. And I actually use a recycled mushroom tray. You get a pallet of mushrooms. I don't even put drainage in because they come up so quick. Put a bit of soil in. It's 80p for a big box of dried peas, and that will last you the summer almost. Yeah,
that's such a good thing. Yeah. The first thing I always recommend to people if they want to start growing is pea shoots. And you just go just go into the supermarket, buy this box of dried peas, and it is wonderful. That's a wonderful thing to do. And my kids really like pea shoots, so it's a good way of introducing kids to growing stuff indoors as well. And it's so quick and simple.
You've never grown plants before. Growing plants is a confidence game. We all know that as gardeners. You kind of do a little bit, you get a bit of success, you want to do a bit more, and it kind of moves out from there, doesn't it? And just quite a nice place to start, I think.
Yeah. And where would you recommend that I source my houseplants? You talked about supermarkets, but say I want to be a little bit more specialist. I am an organic grower. I want to take more care, so I'm quite happy to buy online. Is that a good idea?
There are loads of different sources to buying houseplants, and if you're an organic grower, you're going to come up against this problem of big nurseries and the fact that these plants will have been treated with something that is not organic. That said, lots of the big nurseries now are trying to cut down on their use of synthetic chemicals, A, because it costs money, and B, because of concerns about the environment. So a lot of them are using a lot of biological controls now. So things are moving in the right direction. But if you want to buy houseplants, obviously you've got a concern about plant miles. So again, if you can find a local person who's got houseplants and beg some cuttings off them, then that's probably a really good way to go, because you're going to be reducing your plant miles and you're going to get plants that are probably will be more adapted to your environment, to a home environment, than a plant that's come out of a garden centre where it's been very much mollycoddled. There are small-scale houseplant growers around, and there are specialist nurseries around, but you need to do your research. Where are they actually getting their plants from? Are they growing them from seed? Are they producing their own plants? And so the more you can research, then the more you'll know the provenance of the plants. So I mean, I've bought plants. I'm not snobby. I've bought plants from all kinds of supermarkets before. I've bought plants from specialist growers. I've raised plants from seed. I've been to plant swaps. I mean, if you can go to a plant swap, that's a wonderful thing to do, because you end up with all kinds of stuff. Also, I'd recommend joining specialist plant societies like the British Cactus and Succulent Society. Wonderful growers there, growing on a small scale, who will be able to supply you with wonderful plants. So there's lots of different options. But as with every part of life where you're trying to be kind of ethical and organic, you've got to do your research.
Footwork.
Yeah, there's footwork involved. There really is.
I think one of the things I like doing, I've got quite a few plants this way, is you'll go to some well-known DIY stores and they'll have that trolley in the corner where stuff's half dead. You've seen that? And I've got quite a few houseplants up there. I love rescuing houseplants because they'll take quite a hard cutting, most of them. They'll come back. And so that's kind of, I think, you justify their source by rescuing them a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I'm really excited about the fact that lots of people in their 20s are getting into houseplants, and I'm interested to see where it's going to take us. Is this houseplant trend going to wear out? Are we going to lose interest? I don't think it's going to happen. I think that the people who are getting into houseplants now, the people that I see, listening to my podcast and following me on social media, they're really engaged in this world, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how, in the future, where people take that. And I think things that are, at the moment, quite fringy and not very mainstream, like aquaponics and hydroponics and green walls, are going to explode in popularity as people want to incorporate houseplants into their home more and see the benefits of houseplants. I mean, there's a lot of very unnuanced stuff on social media about, houseplants clean the air. Well, it's not quite as simple as that. But houseplants do have multiple benefits, and if you have enough of them, yes, they could potentially improve the environment of your home. So I think that is a real area that I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops.
I agree. I think also where I think houseplants can make a bit of a difference is in all respects. If you look at gardening and how it's presented, it can look a bit cliquey, I think, in a little way. And sort of glossy magazines, glossy TV programs. I think some people are intimidated by that, and I think houseplants are just a great place to start because they're not that hard to do. And when you've grown one, you'll want to grow more. And I think it is a springboard for future gardeners. I like to think so. Yeah,
I hope so. And I think that it's also, I try to kind of have some reality in there, and that like as I always say to people, I've killed so many houseplants, and that's okay. Like, you're not coming across as this, as you say, very glossy thing of, everything's doing really well. I've always got some dead houseplants somewhere in my house because inevitably I'm experimenting, trying new things, and so, I've got a busy life, I've got a family, I've got children, so not everything always goes to plan. And that's a good message to get out there, because I think sometimes people think, I can't do houseplants because I had that plant back in, 2007 and it died. Well, okay, that's probably just a number of different things have gone wrong there. Don't feel afraid to try again, because there is enormous amount to be gained from experimenting with houseplants. And find the ones that work for you. Like, you might be a cacti and succulent person, you might be an aroid person, you might be a fern person. I'm definitely not a fern person. I've got one fern in here which is looking kind of miserable right now. So you've got to find out what plants suits you and your house and your lifestyle, and then go from there.
And do you think there's something about the fact that in your house makes you very fond of them?
Well, that's a really interesting point.
So you build up a relationship with the plant.
Most
perhaps
definitely.
More closely than you do your veg patch.
I remember I had a big Monstera, the Secosa, when I lived in Brighton, and when I got my place at Edinburgh, I had to leave it, and it broke my heart. It really did. I gave it to the person I knew would look after it, but it really did. It hurt me to leave it.
Yeah.
I think you do form massive emotional relationships with them, like any garden, or any plant. The longer you keep it alive, the more important it becomes to you.
And especially, I find this younger generation of gardeners who are coming through, who possibly don't have children and possibly can't even have pets because they're working full time, and they really do have an emotional investment in plants. And I get people who are like devastated because this plant's not doing very well, and my attitude is kind of like, there's always another one. But sometimes, people are just so sad when something is dying. They really have made a bond with that plant. And that's a wonderful thing, because we all need something to nurture and care for. So yes, I mean, my family just kind of see me coming in with another plant. They're like, Mom,
well, I have to say, my good lady, she's stopped me now. There's so many of them. It's like an hour to get round them all, and she's got enough.
My husband, he's quite plant blind, so oftentimes I find I can introduce things without him noticing. But if it's something like unusual, he'll go, "Oh, I wasn't there last time." "Oh yeah, it's been there for ages. Dear. Don't worry about it."
That's excellent.
Good.
Really, really great. Thank you, Jane.
No worries.
I so enjoyed meeting Jane, and there's no doubt that houseplants are enjoying a huge popularity at the moment. But it's so frustrating that it's almost impossible to buy an organic one. So maybe make friends with a houseplant owner and, like Jane says, take some cuttings instead. So that's all we have time for today. Don't forget to visit our website www.gardenorganic.org.uk for any help you might need for your organic growing. Next month we celebrate Veganuary with vegan grower Matt Appleby. And until then, I hope your Christmas break is a happy and loving one, and the weather allows you to get out and savour the season. Warm wishes to you from Chris and I, and thank you for listening. Thank you to Kevin MacLeod for providing the music.